Hello everyone, this is the second chapter of the XSlides tutorials, section 4. In this section, I will show you how to create a pivot table in the Excel document for data analytics by XSlides, how to set the formula for the cell, and how to create the defined name, add the shape to the worksheet, set the property for the workbook, and etc. I will show you how to generate a merchandise sales report spreadsheet. We will learn 9 XSlides functions by this example and create 3 pivot tables in the workbook. First, we will using the following 3 exported functions of the XSlides. Open file, join cell name, and set cell formula. Create a directory named 2.4 in the tutorials directory and put prepared workbook which contains source data in this directory. The source data includes the sales of 3 types of products in the first quarter of each year in 4 regions. The value in the sales column is empty. Open the project in the Visual Studio Code editor. Create a source code with the Go extension named main.go. Import the format library and the XSlides library. Create the main function and open the data.xlsx by open file function provided by XSlides, receiving and checking the error. Get the struct variable named f, using differ function to close the workbook when the function returns. Call the save as function implemented by f to save as a new workbook named book1.xlsx. Run go mode init command creates a new module rooted in the current directory, and run go mode tidy to add any missing module requirements necessary to build the current module's packages and dependencies. Define a variable sheet name for the default worksheet name. Then fill the sales value in the column range E2 to E73 with random number by formula. Join cell name from column name and the row number by join cell name function in the for loop. Get the reference for each cell and set the normal formula for the cell by the setCellFormula function. Generate a random number with the formula function rand_between. Specify the random number between 2000 to 6000, receiving and checking the error return. Save the code and run the program. Open the generated workbook in Excel, and the sales value in the sales column has been filled. Next, let's learn how to set the defined name and create a pivot table in the worksheet. Create a defined name by setDefineName function. Specify the reference range by field refers to, and specify the scope of the defined name by field scope. If the scope file is not specified, the default scope is the workbook. Save the code and run the program. Reopen the workbook. You can see the defined name has been added, and then using the add pivot table function implemented by f to create the pivot table. There are various configurations of the pivot table can be specified with the pivot table option data type parameter. The data range field is used for specifying the data source of the pivot table, which supports range reference or defined name. I use the defined name just created here. The pivot table range field used for specify the range to place the pivot table. Create the first pivot table in the range G2 to L13 on the sheet 1. Specify the rows field of the pivot table by rows field. Specify the pivot table files with pivot table field data type array. The data represents the field name. The default subtotal represents the default summarize. Put the year and the month field into the rows field of the pivot table. Specify the filter field of the pivot table by filter field. Put the region field into it. Columns are used for specifying the column field of the pivot table, which also requires the pivot table file data type array. Put the type of merchandise into the columns field, and put the sales field into the data field of the pivot table. Specify the name of files as cumulative sales. Set the value of subtotal as sum to specify summarize by sum. Receiving and checking the error return. Save the code and run the program. Open the generated workbook. There a pivot table has been created in the worksheet. This pivot table can help us to analyze the sales of merchandise by region and year. Next, let's create a new pivot table to analyze the sales of merchandise by month. Duplicate the code of creating the pivot table I just written. Change the range of place pivot table in the pivot table range field. Adjust the field's order of the pivot table. Put the region into the rows field. Put the year into the filter field. And put the month and the type of merchandise into the columns field of the pivot table. Set the pivot table with the light green style theme by pivot table style name field. Save the code and run the program. Reopen the generated workbook. The second pivot table has been created in the worksheet. Next, let's create a new pivot table to analyze the sales of merchandise by region and duplicate code for creating a pivot table. Change the range to place the pivot table to G30 to X36. Put the month into the rows file. Put the region and the type of merchandise into the columns file. And set the pivot table with a light yellow style theme. Save the code and run the program. Open the generated workbook. The third pivot table has been created, which supports filtering by year. Next, I will show you how to set the view properties of the worksheet, how to add the shapes to the worksheet, and how to set the properties of the workbook. Set the view properties of the worksheet by the setSheetViewOptions function. The first parameter of this function is the worksheet name. The second parameter is the view index. Set the default scale of the sheet 1 as 120% in the zoom scale field. Specify the first top left cell when opening the worksheet by the top left cell field. Receiving and checking the error. Save the code and run the program. Open the generated workbook. The default scale of the sheet 1 was 120%, and the top left cell was G1. Next, add shapes into the worksheet by addShape function. Create a rectangle shape at the N3 cell on sheet 1. The first parameter of this function is the worksheet name. The second parameter is the left upper cell coordinates of the shape. And the third parameter is the shape format represented in JSON. Specify the type of shape as a rectangle by type field, and specify the fill color and border style of the shape by color field. Specify the text in the shape by paragraph field. The text property used for specify the literal content. Set the text in bold, italic style, and the Times New Roman font with the font field. Set the font size to 36, gray color, single underline. Set the width of the rectangle to 200 and the height of the rectangle to 70, and set the width of the borderline to 1.5. Receiving and checking the error. Save the code and run the program. Reopen the generated workbook in Excel. You can see that there a rectangle shape with a custom style has been added to the worksheet. Next, let's learn how to set the workbook properties by setDocProps function. The setDocProps function requires a parameter in the doc properties data type. The category field in the doc properties used to specify the document category. Set the creator of the document as Xlist in the create field. The subject field is used for specifying the subject of the document. The title field is used for specifying the title of the document. And there are some other files here. Save the code and run the program. Open the generated workbook in Excel. Check the spreadsheet document properties by choosing the properties in the File menu. Okay, that's it for this video. If you like it, please give me a thumbs up. If you have any questions, please comment below. And welcome to subscribe and ring the bell so you can get notified anytime we release new content. Thanks for your watching and thanks for your choosing Xlist.